My parents ruined my first startup and gave every client to my brother. And 3 years later, my $749 million cybersecurity empire was on every headline they could find. I was standing in my office when Dad's text appeared. Family dinner. No excuses, no apology, no congratulations. Just an order. Outside the glass walls, my employees moved quietly beneath the blue glow of security monitors. Screens carried my company's name across financial news feeds. Investors were celebrating. Analysts were calling me one of the youngest founders to build a cybersecurity empire at that scale. But I remembered a different room, a cheap office, 6 exhausted employees, my first contract stacked neatly beside my laptop, and my father standing there, telling me, "Your brother needs the clients more than you do." Within weeks, every major client had been transferred to my brother's company. They expected me to collapse. Instead, I learned something that changed everything. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not destroying the people who betrayed you. It is becoming impossible for them to pretend they never did. I had always been the quiet one in my family. My older brother, Daniel, could walk into a room and make everyone listen. My father admired that confidence. My mother admired his charm. I was the one they trusted with the work nobody noticed. I built things. At 17, I was repairing broken computers for neighbors. At 22, I was designing security systems for small businesses from a rented apartment, sleeping beside tangled cables and cold coffee. My parents called it a phase. When I launched my first cybersecurity startup, I thought they might finally see me differently. I had 8 employees, 12 clients, and just enough money to believe the future was mine. Instead, my father asked Daniel to help. That word became the beginning of everything. Daniel had no experience in cybersecurity, but he had my family's trust. My father introduced him to my clients as the business-minded son. My mother quietly encouraged them to move their contracts to Daniel's company. I protested once. My father looked at me like I was being childish. "You're too emotional," he said. "Daniel knows how to handle people." Within months, my company was empty. What hurt wasn't losing the clients. It was watching my parents celebrate Daniel for the success they had taken from me. I didn't argue after that. I packed my laptop, closed the office, and disappeared from their lives. They thought I had failed. I simply stopped giving them a front row seat to what came next. The betrayals never came as explosions. They came quietly, wrapped in smiles. At family dinners, my father began asking Daniel about our business, even when I was sitting 3 feet away. Daniel would glance at me, then lower his eyes to his plate, pretending not to notice. My mother was subtler. "Daniel has such a natural way with people," she would say while clearing the table. "Some people are simply better suited for leadership." The first time she said it, I smiled. The 5th time, I stopped answering. Then came the phone calls. Former clients started contacting me privately, apologizing in careful voices. They told me my father had assured them Daniel was taking over because I was moving in another direction. I hadn't told anyone that. When I confronted my father, he didn't look surprised. He simply adjusted his cuff and said, "Don't make this personal." That sentence stayed with me, because it had already become personal. Weeks later, Daniel arrived at my apartment wearing the watch my first major client had given me. He noticed me staring at it. "Oh," he said softly. "Dad said it was basically company property." I looked at the watch, then at him. Neither of us spoke. That evening, I deleted my family from my business contacts. Not blocked, deleted. There was a difference. I wasn't planning revenge yet. I was simply learning to stop expecting fairness from people who had already decided. I didn't deserve it. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday, when I received an email from the last client I had lost. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it. He wasn't asking me to come back. He was apologizing. He wrote that my father had pressured him to transfer his contract to Daniel, promising that Daniel would carry on everything I had built. But after several months, the company had begun missing deadlines and ignoring security concerns. Then came the sentence that changed me. I should have trusted the person who built the system in the first place. I sat motionless for several minutes. Rain tapped against my window. The apartment was dark except for the pale light from my laptop. Until that moment, I had been trying to prove my parents wrong. Suddenly, I realized that was still giving them control over my life. So I made a different decision. I would never ask them to recognize my worth again. The next morning, I started over. No family connections, no borrowed reputation, no favors. Just my skills, a small team, and one rule. Every client would choose us because we earned their trust. Our first contract was modest. Then another followed. Then 5. I worked until sunrise, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood what my parents had accidentally given me when they took everything away. Freedom. Years later, when our company began attracting serious investors, I never called my parents. I let the results speak. And eventually, they became impossible to ignore. I never planned to destroy my parents. I planned to become untouchable. The first thing I did was rebuild properly. Every contract went through a lawyer. Every partnership was documented. Every ownership percentage was recorded. I created strict boundaries between business and family, then treated those boundaries as non-negotiable. I also stopped talking about my progress. No announcements at family gatherings. No numbers. No screenshots, no hints. When people asked what I was working on, I simply said, a few things. Behind that quiet answer, everything was moving. I assembled a small team of engineers who cared more about solving difficult problems than impressing investors. We focused on protecting companies from increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks and built our reputation one client at a time. I kept every old contract, email, invoice, and message from my first company, not because I was obsessed with the past, because records mattered. If my family ever tried to rewrite what happened, I wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside anyone's memory. As the company grew, I hired professionals to handle negotiations, compliance, and legal matters. I refused shortcuts, especially those offered by people who wanted access to what I had built. Then came the most important decision. I would never confront my parents. No accusations, no angry speech, no public revenge. If they ever wanted to understand what they had lost, they would have to watch from a distance. And I knew exactly how powerful silence could become when backed by results. The payoff arrived without an announcement. It began with a headline, Cybersecurity. Startup reaches $749 million valuation after record growth. I was standing beside a conference room window when my assistant placed the printed article on my desk. I barely looked at it. My phone, however, wouldn't stop vibrating. Old classmates congratulated me. Former clients sent messages. Investors requested meetings. Then, after years of silence, my mother called. I let it ring. A minute later, Dad texted, family dinner, no excuses. I stared at those 4 words until the screen dimmed. Not congratulations. Not we're proud of you. An order. So I went. The restaurant was quiet, expensive, and familiar enough to make the past feel uncomfortably close. Dad stood when I entered. For a moment, his expression softened. Then he looked toward Daniel. Daniel wasn't smiling. He had seen the headlines too. My father gestured toward the chair beside him. Sit down. We're family. I pulled out the chair but didn't sit immediately. I remember, I said. His smile disappeared. I placed a thin folder on the table. Inside were copies of the original contracts, the client transfers, and the emails showing exactly how my first company had been dismantled. Nobody touched the folder. Nobody needed to. Daniel's face went pale. My father stared at the pages, then at me. You kept these? Yes. A long silence followed. I closed the folder. I didn't come here to fight, I said. I came because you asked me to show up. Then I stood. For once, nobody told me to stay. The silence after I left that restaurant lasted longer than the dinner itself. My father didn't call again that night. Neither did my mother. Daniel did. His message contained only 6 words. I didn't know he kept everything. I read it once and deleted it. Over the next few weeks, the family dynamic changed without any dramatic confrontation. My mother stopped mentioning Daniel's company when relatives asked about business. My father became unusually quiet whenever someone brought up my company. People had started learning the real story. Not because I had exposed my family publicly, because facts have a way of surviving when emotions disappear. Several former clients reached out to me. Some apologized for leaving my first company. Others admitted they had believed the version of events my father had given them. I accepted the apologies without bitterness. That mattered more than I expected. For years, I had measured my worth by the way my parents treated me. Their approval had felt like a verdict. Now I understood how dangerous that was. They had taken my first company. They had damaged relationships. They had made me question whether I was capable of building anything without their approval. But they had never owned the one thing I eventually reclaimed. My belief in myself. That is why the story matters. Because betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people whose approval you spent your whole life trying to earn. And when that happens, revenge doesn't have to mean destroying them. Sometimes the greatest consequence is simply refusing to let their version of you become your identity. I walked away with less family than I had before, but for the first time I had more of myself. Years passed after that dinner, and something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking about it, not because I forgot what my parents had done, but because the memory no longer had the power to hurt me. My company continued growing. We opened new offices, hired people I once could only dream of working beside, and protected businesses that trusted us with the security of everything they had built. The $749 million valuation eventually became an old headline. What mattered more was what came after it. I became the kind of leader I had once needed. When a young employee made a mistake, I didn't humiliate them. When someone had an idea that sounded impossible, I listened. And when talent appeared quietly in the room, I made sure it wasn't overlooked simply because someone louder demanded attention. My relationship with my parents never returned to what it had been. There were occasional messages, a birthday greeting, a holiday text, a photograph from my mother. I answered some, ignored others, not out of anger, out of peace. Daniel eventually closed his company and started working elsewhere. We never became friends, but we stopped being enemies. As for me, I kept building. There were new markets ahead, new risks, and another generation of people, depending on me to make decisions carefully. Sometimes, late at night, I still remember that first office, the empty desks, the stolen contracts, the feeling that my future had been taken from me. Then I remember the man I became afterward, and I finally understand the greatest thing they lost wasn't my company. It was the chance to know the person who built it. They took my beginning, but they never owned my ending.